What is the Forlorn Swords? The Forlorn Swords is located at the southernmost tip of Avalon, a haunting expanse of jagged, snow-swept highlands pierced by colossal, ancient blades embedded in the earth, like the petrified remnants of a long-fallen warrior host. Beneath the biting winds and vistas lies a narrative of betrayal and redemption, where the swords themselves whisper of Arthurian echoes. But what is the Forlorn Swords, and what is their story? In this video, we will explore its transformation from White Point to the Forlorn Swords, and what it became several hundred years later. This will be our first video in our Tainted Grail Geography series, so I hope that you enjoy. The southernmost tip of Avalon was known as White Point. The sun shining off the snow-covered peaks of this rocky peninsula is almost blinding. Before Arthur's arrival on Avalon, it was barren. Beneath the rocky crags lay an ancient cave called the Grotto of the First Men. There we find two extraordinary things. For one, a construct. The construct was made in the likeness of the foredwellers, hinting at their involvement. For two, we find cave paintings lining the walls, detailing the first tribes of humanity in ages past, surviving the weirdness and appearing to fight mist-bearers. Little is known about this place, but it is theorized that these first men were the first humans created. It is also possible that they were like a prototype before being sent to the homelands to populate the material world. Little is known beyond this, but it is likely that this human tribe left their caves and soon partially populated Avalon before leaving for the homelands, whether willingly or by force from the locals. When Arthur first landed on Avalon, White Point was a brutal land, teeming with wolves, bears, and colossal bones of ancient beasts. Alien structures dotted the area, including those about which we have little information on, such as the Lone Pillars, stone towers that rise from dozens to hundreds of feet high. It is said that these Lone Pillars absorb the blood of the fallen to enhance magical rituals. Arthur and his followers, seeking a civilized haven during the exodus to Avalon, steered away from White Point and its dangers. White Point seemed to have a will of its own, its icy mountains repelling all who dared tread there. Only the Dal Riata, a people as fierce as the land itself, could thrive in such a place. Outcasts in the homelands, shunned for their pagan beliefs and fierce independence, they were never welcomed into Arthur's Camelot. Yet, here in Avalon, the Dal Riata found their home at White Point, carving out a life where others feared to walk. They lined the roads with ornamented totems, littering them in all directions as a warning to the non-Dal Riata. At their village in White Point, they built a palisade, not trusting the nobles and various lords to keep to themselves. Those who ventured too close were met with the sword. Their skulls were then painted and placed on the tops of the stockade. White Point mostly kept to itself and was totally self-sufficient. Still, many of the Dal Riata were used like mercenaries in Arthur's army, some revered for their ferocity in battle. Several of their tribesmen were blacksmiths and engineers. Given the local wildlife and proximity to the sea, they had plenty of hunting and fishing spots. However, given its accessibility to the Isle of the Dead just off its eastern shore, the people were unnerved. Every few days, one of the Dal Riata would feel an incessant call before attempting to sail on a fishing boat or swim across the sea to the island. This left many of the locals wary. At one event, Morgane, the king's sister, arrived and bought many of their boats to sail to the Isle of the Dead. The Dal Riata Jarl at the time was a 12-year-old boy and had the astounding responsibility of managing his people and the political climate. He found that out in this frozen wasteland, the Fordwellers and giants left them alone. They later held a tentative peace with the giants, feeling a stronger kinship to them than the nobles in Tintagel. Years of the Dal Riata's good relations with the giants passed, but King Arthur and his army arrived at White Point. Humanity and the giants were at war. However, the Dal Riata were a neutral party. Some of their tribesmen were in Arthur's army, but they had only ever known peace with the giants. Observing from the sidelines, they witnessed the king's executors ride to the battle, seemingly to settle the matter with the giants peacefully. As the Dal Riata watched, many in fear of what would happen once Arthur's army was defeated, a lone rider approached White Point. The Jarl was given a missive with King Arthur's seal. In the letter, Arthur explained to the Jarl the current situation. The giants could spell the end of humanity on Avalon, and he asked the Dal Riata to do something immoral. The children of the giants had been held captive by the Fordwellers and recently escaped. Arthur wanted the Dal Riata to recapture the children, to use them as leverage in negotiations. In return, Arthur promised a seat at the table in Tintagel, trade agreements, and equal rights. The boy was in a tough spot, but he knew his people were disgruntled, which was why so many had deserted their home to join Arthur's army in the first place. The Jarl agreed and sent his Dal Riata trackers north to capture the giant children. Soon they were rounded up, and Arthur used this, forcing the giants to swear an oath to never take up arms again against humanity. In a grand spectacle, the three giant warlords drove their swords into the earth. Many of the captains of the army followed suit. After doing so, Nimue, Merlin's apprentice, cast a spell on the swords. For all of time, these swords would grow larger and larger. At first, they were several dozen feet long, but in just a few weeks, they were the size of buildings, and eventually skyscrapers. White Point became known as Giant's Oath, and people from all around could see the spectacle. Once the event ended and the giants left, the Jarl came to Arthur and handed over the children with a heavy heart. The boy then asked the once and future king about the logistics of moving some Dal Riata to Tintagel and the intricacies of their agreement. Arthur then revealed that it was all a lie. He could never allow the Dal Riata to live among the people in Tintagel or his future Camelot. Their people were far too barbaric and threatened to unravel the fabric of society, so they would be banished to White Point forever. Arthur then told them that if they were to act out of line and demand consolidation with Tintagel, he would be forced to loose the giants upon the Dal Riata. The Jarl backed down, and Arthur and his army left. After this event, the Dal Riata were up in arms with the Jarl and Arthur. The Dal Riata appeared to have been unified before the betrayal, but afterwards they split into several tribes. They all formed unique societies and beliefs. Some clung to the Allmother, whom they called Mater, others to the Stagfather, and many developed relationships with the giants. They deeply regretted the injustice that they had done, and many of the giants stayed. During the war, the veteran Dal Riata returned with a secret. Using captive Fordwellers, they learned how to make weird steel and all manner of Fordweller craft. The blacksmiths who learned these techniques, called stone wardens, were masters of the craft. However, it came with a cost. After crafting for so long, they would begin to enter a stone sleep. Dozens of these master craftsmen would turn to stone in their old age, and eventually, they too dotted the landscape like frozen wardens. After hundreds of years, Giant's Oath was now known as the Forlorn Swords. By now, most of the swords were a few 100 feet long, and the Dal Riata had dug in their heels. One could see half of Avalon when climbing the swords to the hilt. Being so high, the weirdness barely touched the area. The giant patrons of old were chained to the land forever, and bestowed various blessings upon the tribes. The Dal Riata were tolerated by Camelot, but were never accepted. The mountainous region was covered with elevators, paths, caves, mines, forges, and all sorts of Dal Riata inventions. The Forlorn Swords was enveloped by Dal Riata hands. This was their home. Every few generations, an altercation with Camelot arose, and Camelot's army would pummel the dissenters into submission, many times wiping the warmongering tribes off the map. Now, though you can take the story several different ways in the RPG, given the fall of Avalon and the Last Night board game, it likely went down like this. After centuries of resentment, and due to the recent annihilation of the Gunvalder tribe, the Dal Riata were united and demanded independence. Camelot, fearing a bloody war, including the awakening of ancient giants, amassed an army, and a brief war ensued. Camelot, likely led by Galahad, decimated the Dal Riata and hunted them down relentlessly to leave no trace of the tribes. After the annihilation, the Camelocian army returned home and left the Forlorn Swords in ruins. The Dal Riata went from the strongest fighting force in the south to a tiny handful of straying wanderers. In the following years, the secret of Weirdsteel and Fordweller crafts never died, as the few survivors kept the knowledge alive. Eventually, after the fall of Avalon, the menhirs were dying. Connacht, which was about 10 miles north, underwent a catastrophe. The world was falling apart, and the weirdness was overtaking everything. Leaderless and lost, the people of Connacht had no home. Then, some remembered the Forlorn Swords, and the near-extinct Dal Riata. It was said at the top of the sword's hilt, it was so high that the weirdness didn't affect it, or affected it minimally. In addition, the Dal Riata engineers had created several elevators and contraptions to traverse the frozen wasteland. Connacht decided to migrate to the Forlorn Swords. The few Dal Riata survivors were wary, but were guides to the refugees. Over the course of the next few years, while Connacht's populace stayed in caves due to the bitter cold, the Dal Riata engineers and Connacht's workers planned for a massive construction project. A giant hammock was made connecting the two largest swords. From there, the people would be far from the weirdness and no longer need a menhir to survive. The giant hammock was built, and Connacht rebuilt their homes, hovering hundreds of feet over the ground. Though Avalon was falling into a pit of despair during this time, Connacht and the last vestiges of the Dal Riata survived. Coincidentally, as the population grew, so did the swords, increasing the size of the hammock and allowing for an inching expanse. The enormous swords dwarf even the mountains. One lies on its side, its blade reaching the bleeding land. Its pommel obscured by the mists in the east. A ruined building nestles under its edge. You notice a village hanging high above between the remaining two swords, an enormous hammock stretched under the gray sky. The people of Connacht's culture merged with that of the Dal Riata, and they became more barbaric, yet with a deep interest in the next generation. Worship and prayer to the All-Mother was common, and stayed a cornerstone of their culture. They likely used the Fordweller crafting to learn how to create the hammock in the first place, and the secret was passed between generations to repair and expand the hammock when needed. These ropes created electricity, but the people did not understand the properties. All they knew was that touching the rope with your hand would kill you, and you had to use very special tools in order to do repairs. It is unknown what happened in the years following. Regardless of the events that transpired, I can't imagine Connacht ever fully died. From its story from the Grotto of the First Men, White Point, Giant's Oath, Forlorn Swords, Connacht, and to the mysterious future, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching this deep dive into the Forlorn Swords lore. If you enjoyed, please like, subscribe, consider joining our Discord, and share your thoughts in the comments. Stay tuned for more Tainted Grail geography breakdowns, and I'll be seeing you guys next time. So yeah, see you later. Bye-bye.